Hello, I'm Dave Moss, founder of the Unfunded List and host of the Open Door Philanthropy podcast. Thanks for joining us as we're exploring collaborative giving. Today we'll be talking about P3s, development, affordable housing, gentrification, and more with John Ahmann, CEO of the Westside Future Fund in Atlanta, Georgia. Did I pronounce that right? John Ahmann?
Pretty close, John Ahmann.
John Ahmann. Welcome. So far, I believe we've only communicated over email. It's nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. And we're just going to dive right into some questions, all right?
Great.
Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like?
I grew up at Atlanta, Georgia. I was actually born in Atlanta, the city of Atlanta.
All right.
And because I don't have a Southern accent, a lot of folks are like, you did, and I did. I grew up in the city of Atlanta. Overall, I guess I had a pretty good childhood. Some of the defining things, I guess, that happened in my childhood were, I went to a very small school when I was growing up. It's called Padilla School, and actually when I started there, it had just opened up as a small private school. So that was a really defining life experience. I graduated with 26 people, so it was a small school. It's much different now.
26
was my graduating class.
Was it, you say it's a private school. Did it have a particular focus? Was it like a boarding program? Did it?
No, it wasn't a boarding program. It was, kind of based on, Pacific, way of learning in terms of, how they taught. But actually, I lived just down the street from the school, so I walked to school.
That sounds nice.
So it definitely wasn't a boarding school. And then I went right down the street to Emory University, which wasn't my first choice, but my father taught there, so I got a tuition scholarship. So
your father was a professor?
Yeah, he was actually a doctor.
Interesting.
So he's taught in the medical school. He also saw patients and did research.
At Emory?
At Emory.
Coincidentally, both of my parents are professors. Technically doctors, but you wouldn't want them in any kind of medical emergency because their doctorates are in history and French. So if you ever have an emergency in any of those areas,
if you're French, call 911 after
that is my one of my things about people who don't have medical degrees calling themselves doctors is, what if there's an emergency and people think you're a doctor? I understand wanting to recognize people's accomplishments, but it's very interesting. I enjoyed being a professor's kid. Did you? My parents were at Colby College up in Maine. And one of the perks of being a professor's kid is you get to run around the campus a little bit, use some of the facilities. Did you ever hang out at Emory?
When I was older, I think one summer I did an internship with my father.
Oh, really?
When he was doing some of the research, yeah. But growing up, my parents actually got divorced when I was really young. So when I was growing up, I didn't actually see a whole lot of my biological father.
Oh.
But when I was older, a teenager, spent some time in that, because I remember one time he was doing research, and I don't even want to say it was, on some of the, because he was an expert on when babies are born prematurely, they often have a lot of fluid in their brain. And so he was kind of leading research on what you do about that.
Very interesting. Did you ever consider you didn't become a doctor?
Mm-mm. No, I never considered being a doctor, and I never considered doing a PhD either, because I don't think I have the patience to write a dissertation.
Yeah.
I'd like to have the title, to your point. People call me doctor.
Yeah, it sounds nice.
But the dissertation always seemed like that looks like a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. My father explained it to me that if you're getting a PhD, you're going to the edge of all human knowledge, and then you go a little bit further. And you don't have to do that because there's plenty of knowledge already existing that you can work within. People who choose to pursue PhDs need to make that choice that that all of known knowledge is not enough for them, that they need to go out and create more. And I think that should be obviously that shouldn't be everybody. We don't all have to go out and have pioneering new ideas. Plenty of work for the rest of us to do. So I did not go to Colby College. I was very very much wanted to leave the state of Maine at the
Well,
time.
you and I had that in common because I very much wanted it. Because not only Atlanta, but I was like in the same 2 mile square area.
And you did go to Emory though.
Yeah, I went to Emory.
So you waited until after college to leave Atlanta.
Yeah, went until after I graduated from Emory.
So we'll get to that in a moment. But back to little John growing up in Atlanta. What kinds of other than school? What kinds of things did you do? Did you play baseball? Did you do plays? What did you do as a kid?
No, I didn't play baseball. I was always a little fearful of a speeding hard ball.
I also got hit. I got hit often. Yeah.
That was stuff that
I used to crowd the plate a little.
Yeah, quite overcome. For sports, I played soccer and basketball. And I guess in a triumph, we had a rivalry with a local private school in my senior year, the year before we lost to them in the championship. And in my senior year, we beat them. And we beat them and went into double overtime, then to shootouts. Beat them on their home turf in the shootout. I can still remember the song I was listening to. Remember that game, beating that school. So it's the funny things you remember.
Yes.
But growing up, I had a tight group of friends because we were all went to Padea together, so we got to know each other really, really well.
Yep. Small school. I would think you would have to. You didn't have those were. If you didn't get along with those kids, then that was it.
Yeah, you're right. You were kind of recycled. You're mad at somebody, go to somebody else, and cycle back around.
Yeah. I went to a pretty small school up in Maine, but not quite your size. But yeah, if you end up with a problem with somebody, it's not like you can't avoid them. They're going to be in your class next year. Like they're going to be around. And you can't really like. I think in some ways I found it's a little restricting. You can't necessarily become your own person because there's so few people. You have to be friends with these folks, right? You have to fit into this tiny culture of tiny folks. What you said that they have a particular way of teaching. Was it like Montessori? What was the approach to education?
It was kind of based on the Montessori method.
Very good, very good. Were you a good student?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was a good student. At the time I was there, they actually didn't have. They changed that later, but when I was there, they didn't actually have letter grades.
No grades.
So
how do you know if you're a good student or not?
They write an evaluation that says you're doing very well, or not so well. But they would, on the philosophy of written grade didn't tell you enough. So they would, except for something like a math quiz, obviously, but everything else was a written evaluation. But yeah, I
kind of like that.
I did. I was always a good, both through, all my schooling was always a good student. My only time my senior year when was focused on having fun. I remember I think I failed woodshop class because I didn't complete the project. But other than that, I did. I was a pretty good student.
You didn't make your birdhouse or whatever. I still got.
It was supposed to be. No, I didn't make.
I've still got the birdhouse I made in Mr. Sprague's class.
Does it work?
No, the birds don't seem to like it. In theory, they could use it, but they don't seem to want to. I got it hanging up outside with some other ones. Was it he was a private school. Was it a religious school at all?
No.
Did you have a particular cultural or faith background growing up?
Grew up a Christian orientation. My father was very Catholic.
And a doctor.
And a doctor, was I was saying very Catholic. So he went to church, every Sunday, took his faith pretty seriously. And he said that when he was growing up, he was either thinking about being a Jesuit priest or a doctor in terms of his kind of. But my mother also grew up Catholic, but then she had some strong feelings about the Catholic Church.
People do. And
so she wasn't as practicing of the faith as my father was. So growing up, when I was ever with my father, I'd go to church whenever. Most of the time I was, all with my mother. So it wasn't so kind of an organized faith wasn't a regular part of my growing up.
But you went on occasion.
Went on
The
occasion,
did
right?
you pick anything up from it? Any useful lessons or anything? Anything that you carry with you today?
One thing that stuck with me and was my father. After my mother and father got divorced, uh, about a year later or so, he got remarried.
Oh,
And I had a younger sister, but when he got remarried, because he was very Catholic, you're not supposed to get divorced.
right.
Um, so he, and because I still remember this, received from the church one after and got an annulment
Oh,
at the time, which kind of, as it was just explained to me, that the annulment basically says the marriage never existed, therefore there was no sin.
right. But
Then
there you are. You exist.
right, exactly. So I had a hard time with that.
Yeah, that does sound difficult.
So that gave me some kind of early, less than friendly feelings about the Catholic Church, because I felt like,
Hmm.
you're right, here I am. How does that work? They were never married.
Yeah, I didn't grow up Catholic. I grew up in a very Catholic town, though, and so I was often confused by Catholics. That was the standard standard thing growing up for me. Did you ever go to the CCD, the confirmation classes? I know Catholic young folks do that.
No, I don't think. I'm trying to remember if I did or not. I don't think I did.
Yeah, I never went either, but I would always like I said, the whole town was Catholic, so all the other kids would go, and they would like come. They would always be talking about it, coming back talking about it. I myself am Jewish, and many of them would first learn about Jews in that class, and then come to me with questions about Judaism and all that. I was one of the only Jewish students in the town, and so that's most of my memory of Catholicism is just sort of being confused. I also remember when I first heard about annulments, one of my friends went through the same thing, and I just remember being thoroughly confused about that. I mean, we Jews get divorced, but that wouldn't. It's not a. I think you have to get. There's a thing that's called a get. You have to like get permission from the family, but that's like it's Orthodox Jews. It's not something that I've in my personal experience. So you talk about generosity and giving. I find that most people, hopefully anyway, learn about that when they're a child. In here, you've got some little bit of church experience. You went to a school that you liked. Split family. Who taught you about giving and sharing and the importance of generosity?
Oh, that's a great question.
Thank you.
So, so I don't know.
I've asked that question to a lot of people.
Because I would probably, for me, rephrase that to more of a server's perspective.
Sure. Yes. Especially when, so like I said, I've asked a lot of people this question, and also a follow up question was like, when was it? Do you remember the first time? And feel free to answer this too. First time you ever actually made a gift of your own accord. And for most people, if they're a child, right, children don't have money, so that wasn't you buying something or giving it. It's usually either you did some work to earn the money to buy a gift, or you did service for a neighbor, that's mostly what I hear from folks. And I'm trying to get to like the core motivations of what makes people give. So often it is service. So feel free to talk if that's how you learned about
I
it.
think my first, yeah, to your point, I didn't have money to give away, but my first civic experience I remember I was a teenager. I was still in high school, and I volunteered for a summer at a place, interestingly enough, run by a church.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Emmaus House, and they had a summer camp for inner city youth in Atlanta, and I volunteered there for a summer, so I didn't get paid, but I went there every day.
You were like a counselor, or well,
Yeah,
cool.
like a camp counselor. Yeah, now I was thinking about it.
That was
So
through
that,
the church. Was it a Catholic church?
well, I actually think it was Catholic. Now that we're circling back
Is there?
around.
Are there? I've only been to Atlanta a couple times. Are there a lot of Catholics in Atlanta?
It's definitely not predominant,
Hmm.
but there's a good population.
All right.
I think we'd be Baptist. There's a lot of Baptist.
Did you end up volunteering at a Catholic program because of your own Catholic background, or just because it was a program you wanted to volunteer for?
I think I found out about it through my school, but just in thinking about it, did I consciously make that decision? I don't remember thinking about that way, but that perhaps did that have something to do? I mean, I struggled a lot with growing up with estrangement from my father.
Yeah.
So that was a big theme of growing up for me.
But you chose to volunteer for the Catholic Church, and then you went to school where he taught.
No, I
Are
agree.
those
So there,
was that is that you trying to become closer to him? We're getting pretty personal here, but
no, I think I was had always in my head that my father was a doctor from a service perspective.
sure, yes,
So he wasn't in it to, to make. I mean, I think he made good money, but that wasn't his primary
yeah. I don't think that's
motivation.
why I become. I mean, doctors get paid because they deserve it, but I don't think doctors become doctors to make the big bucks. Hopefully not. They are actually one of the least generous professions. They donate to charity in smaller amounts compared to other professions, and that's largely because, as you say, they view their work as service-related work, right? Most folks who work in service actually don't donate less than people who work in like more extractive fields, right? Like general businessmen donate a lot because right, they probably have some guilt issues.
I feel differently.
They're doing it for different reasons. There, a doctor can right use his actual skills and stuff to make the world a better place, and does so every day. So he's not constantly looking for ways to give back after work, that bears out in the numbers. They donate a smaller percentage of their income. But that's thank you for that. I always think it's interesting to learn a little bit about how folks were growing up, and I never grew up in Atlanta, so no idea what it's like to be a little Catholic boy there. Did you always know you wanted to be the CEO of the Westside Future Fund? What was it? What was the first thing? What did you want to be when you were a kid? What did you when little John? What did he want to be when he grew up?
No idea. When I graduated from college, actually, I didn't know what I'd majored in political science.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had gotten interested at the time in politics, and at the time, because of the nuclear arms race, I got real interested in,
Huh.
Nuclear freeze movement, et cetera. And I was, well, given we've been talking about my father, my estrangement may not be a complete surprise that at the time I was seeing a therapist when I was a high school senior. And I remember him suggesting, because I was kind of pondering what to do when I graduated from college. He's like, why don't you move to DC? A senator from Georgia had just been elected as a Democrat, a guy named Weish Fowler. He said, and he, I guess, had some connections to his office. Maybe you can write you a note, maybe you can get a job working for Senator Weish Fowler. And it's like, okay. And then me and a buddy of mine, actually, his father had been, until recently, had been a congressman. So we packed up his Monte Carlo at the time and drove up to DC, just aspiring to work on the Hill. We were quickly humbled because it was hard to find a job.
You drove to DC before you had. Usually people don't. They
stayed
secure their internship first and then go.
Yeah, his father had an apartment, so we stayed in his dad wasn't there, so we stayed at my friend's dad's apartment, and then we looked for an apartment.
Very nice.
And neither one of us could find a job, so we ended up both waiting tables.
Oh yeah.
While looking, and then intern to try to build experience to get a job on Capitol Hill. So yeah, I was waiting tables, and then back at the time, dating myself, maybe a lot of listeners were like, who's he talking about? At the time, Representative Gephardt was running for president.
Okay.
And I interned him.
I was alive, but I do not recall. I don't actually remember.
Yeah. No, we're digging deep. So yeah, that's how I started.
The restaurant you said you waited tables. Is that restaurant still there in DC?
Yes, it's called Bull Feathers.
Yeah. Okay. I've been to Bull Feathers.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a good. If you're looking for a Capitol Hill internship, I guess that's where you go wait tables, right?
It was.
I heard back in the day that was a real hangout spot for big time. It probably still is, politicals and stuff.
Yeah, and my buddy worked at a place called the Hawk and Dove, and
sure, the Hawk and Dove.
Yeah,
I used to go to Hockenduff pretty regularly, and I was actually there one night when a congressman came in, all hopped up on Ambien, started buying drinks for everybody, and he told
Oh,
us, and then he started screaming about how he has to go vote. I gotta go vote, and he got in his car and went and crashed into the Capitol building. You can look it up. It made the papers and everything. But I used to go. I lived over in the Eastern Market neighborhood.
oh yeah, you know, I live
Hawkenduff's
right
really
back.
well known. It's one of the more famous bars, and I think it might still be there. I'm not sure actually. I haven't
No,
been to that side of
actually,
town in a
it's
while.
my younger daughter just started law school up there, so I was up there helping her find a place, and I went for a run in that part of town. There
Sure.
was the Hawk and Dove. The Hawk and Dove
It
was down there. I couldn't believe it. And then
must have been fixed up by now. It was the
it
last
looked
time I was there. It was like
like the
10 years
same.
ago, and it was in rough shape. Um, Anyway, it's very. I have some similar. My first job was at a school in Vermont. I worked at a school for boys with learning disabilities, and I was not good at teaching. And several aspects of the job were frustrating to me. You need a lot of patience to work at a school in any capacity, let alone the teachers. I think they need infinite patience, but everyone who works there needs some. Especially our boys they had learning disabilities or they had been through some trouble at home or whatever, needed extra support. It's a really good learning experience. And one of the things I learned there is that I was, well, not a great teacher, but I was good at the fundraising. One of the things they had me do is I would give parents tours of the school when they came to visit. We had a really beautiful campus in rural Vermont, pond and everything. And there was also a blacksmith shop. That's how we taught the kids math. They didn't want to learn math, but they did want to make a sword or an axe. And
Right.
if you don't know math, your sword's going to be all crooked and weird. And I was really good at giving the tours to the parents. And in fact, one time I actually got the parent to write a check on the tour, which was not at all part of my job. But my boss there, he said something very similar to what you just said. He says, DC is always hiring. They're always looking for fundraisers. You should go down there. And I got my internship before I packed up my Saab and drove from Maine to DC, which I think is probably about the same distance. The more snow on my trip, and I had to deal with New Jersey's traffic. This is actually the only time I ever drove through New Jersey in my life was when I went from Maine to DC to live there about 15 years ago. And yeah, it's true. They're always hiring fundraisers. I was always able, once I got actually good at fundraising, getting a job there became pretty easy. I was working a lot. Never actually had my Hill internship or anything. It was always sort of the other part of town over there. I always know folks and things. So you eventually did get a Hill position?
I did. I
Did you work for
started
that senator you meant, Weish
no
Fowler?
Weish Fowler.
Yeah,
No,
sorry,
he.
I forgive me. I have not heard of him. I do
Yeah, you're
remember you
good.
mentioned. Sorry to I had a thing I want to follow up on. You mentioned nuclear proliferation, or not? I guess nuclear non-proliferation was your interest. As I vaguely recall, isn't that a big issue of Sam Nunn? Isn't he also from Georgia?
Yeah, U.S. senator, and then he
Wasn't that his
ran a
like
group.
primary focus? Is that a coincidence? Is that why you were interested in it?
No, I was interested in it because at first when I kind of learned, I still remember this as a kid learning that the Soviet Union had missiles pointed at us, and if they fired them in a short amount of time,
Yeah.
would be annihilated. And I at the time thinking, well, why would like why they want to? And we don't even know each other.
Right.
I'm not mad at them.
I've never met them. Yeah.
And so that kind of got me from that it would just sound in my own head was so crazy that something like that could happen. Was how
Yes, it is. Similar. I mean, Maine is where Loring Air Force Base is, which is the closest Air Force base in the U.S. to Moscow. And it's for I don't know if they still have the nukes there, but that's where our nukes were pointed at. We had them. There was the largest stockpile, and it was all there. And I was most Mainers were aware that they were there, right, and all that. And then in the Hunt for Red October, that's where they hide the submarine at the end in Maine,
right.
in one of our fjords. So that was my own growing up. I was thinking about a lot of the same stuff. And in DC that issue still exists. Still people working on nuclear non-proliferation. There's been a lot of issues over my 15 years in DC that were issues when I moved there and remain issues. Some of them have even gotten worse. And we will. One of those issues is housing. So we're going to get into some of your current work now. Thanks very much for talking about your background. I have very very interesting to hear about how other people grow up I imagine your childhood had just in general had, it was similar to mine in many ways, to professor parents and all that, but just less, you had less snow. And
Well,
you knew what soccer was. We didn't, it's not something that
right.
Northern Mainers have a whole lot
I
of.
didn't know what skiing was, so there you go.
You really didn't know what it was?
I mean, I never did it.
I had like
So,
soccer was like I was vaguely aware there was a sport where you can't use your hands. That was the extent of what I knew about it. Hockey was the really big thing up there, and I was not good at it, but I did my best. You were there in DC for a while, and eventually you go back to Atlanta. I'm actually considering moving back to Maine myself at the moment, so I'd love to hear like how did you decide to go back home?
well, when I was working in DC, I initially started with an interest in international issues, and then I ended up one of my first job, my second job, working for a Georgia congressman. He actually represented the counties that I had grown up, had lived,
Hmm.
and through that office, got involved in different local issues. Around primarily around infrastructure and water issues at the time, and then kind of using that office, the leverage of the office, was able to affect change,
Hmm.
uh, and and then some of the other issues in DC, right? Back to some of the things they're still talking about, i.e., the deficit or others,
You name it, yeah.
that I felt like, well, am I really having, an impact? Like, how am I really making a contribution? Unless you're really in the stratosphere on some of those issues in terms of who you're working for. So part of the going back to Atlanta was, okay, I care about Atlanta because I grew up there, and for me, I just want to. I mean, back to a soccer metaphor, I kind of want to know how I made a contribution to the score.
Yep.
Um, and so that when I finished up at my grad work, then going back to Atlanta again, I didn't have a job and I went back to Atlanta, but something that I could at least tell myself was helping to contribute to a better city.
Yeah, very exciting. I feel largely the same. Um, I have sometimes global impact, right? We give feedback to proposals and do other things, or maybe someone listens to the podcast and that helps them. It's very difficult for me to see the result of my own work from DC with at the scale that it is at. And it does sometimes seem like you go home to your locality, that you could have more impact if you're actually working in the region that you're from. I think it's a really important point. We do. It is something that I see a lot in the proposals that we read. Is a lot of people try to because right, if you turn on the news, right, that's global, that's international. It seems like the whole world is all one, right? So lots of times when people are putting their solutions together, their target is the globe, right? I read a lot of proposals that start off with like, there's 4 billion people in the world that are disconnected from the internet, right? I'm like, do you know how many 4 billion people is?
That's a lot of
You think you're
people.
personally gonna like help all 4 billion? Like that's just sort of
Right.
beyond your scale, sir, right? Atlanta's a large city. You're not going to be able to impact all the citizens of Atlanta, right? And that's okay. You're going to be able to help a lot of them, right? And you'll be doing that through currently you're doing that through the Westside Future Fund. And according to their website, the Westside Future Fund is a nonprofit formed by Atlanta's public, private, and philanthropic partners who believe in the future of Atlanta's West Side and are committed to helping historic neighborhoods revitalize and develop into a community Dr. King would be proud to call home. Very nice. How do you? So you can't ask Dr. King. How do you? How do you determine what he would be proud of?
Well, good news is
He wrote some stuff down, gave speeches. You have some source
yeah,
material.
he spoke an awful lot about,
I've heard some of
yeah,
them.
spoke a lot about it. And I mean, the thing for me about Dr. King, in terms of my, lessons and learnings, and in by no way am I a kind of a scholar in that, but,
Mhm.
having read and listened, is he was focused on, both the what and the how, right? So if you want to call the what kind of the basics in terms of, you know, someone having support to live a good life, right? Because after the Civil Rights Act passed, he very much turned his attention to poverty,
Mhm.
and was, planning to, um, and talked a lot about those issues in the last book he wrote, Chaos, Our Community.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the what, but then also what I find personally inspiration is his how, because as a minister, he was, what was primarily a minister. People often forget he was, first and foremost, a spiritual leader. Talked about God all the time.
Yes.
And then one of the things I do appreciate, in terms of some of his own lessons, but in being someone who really practiced, what he preached in terms of, love and agape love, spiritual love. And what I always find remarkable, especially as, growing up in Atlanta and in the South, is here is a person who encountered all the brutality of white supremacism, right? And ultimately was assassinated. But through all of that, still, even to those who oppressed him and hated him and ultimately wanted to kill him, and his family, not just him, his family, his friends, preached, love. And so that the how that he preached to say, how are we going to get to a better place? The how, right? So that I find that very, because he'll talk about the need for like a mindset change in terms of how we, relate to one another, connect to one another. So I think when I think about what would make him proud is both what we're getting done and how we're getting it done.
Yes, well said. I talk about Dr. King with proposal authors sometimes, and one of the things I remind them is that he had to fundraise to do the work that he does. Lots of times we don't think about him as a fundraiser, but he was a very good one. Raised millions of dollars for civil rights causes. The Montgomery bus boycott had a budget of over $1 million. The organization behind it, and he was the one who raised all of that money. And I find that especially when I'm talking to fundraisers, struggling fundraisers, it's important to remind them of that, or particularly people who are frustrated with fundraising and who might be more interested in, I guess, the what, right? Sort of just like generally talking about the problem in inspiring terms, and but he also got to the how, and that is something that we work through with proposal authors all the time. It's something that funders want to see. Some funders want to see very specific metrics, especially around issues of housing, like numbers of people housed, right? So are there, and again, you can't be like, there is no such thing as like pride units, right? So like once we accomplish this work, like the Dr. King's pride goes up 0.5 pride units, right? But are there metrics, quantifiable things that you are tracking with your work there?
Yeah. So for the Westside Future Fund, we're directly, tracking our own housing metrics, which is number of units we have, high quality units that are affordable, which we define as you don't pay more than 30% of your gross income in rent if it's a rental.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I've been asked to prove that sometimes you get asked to like prove that your income is considerably more than that. Which I've found frustrating a few times, because when you run a nonprofit like mine, income is not necessarily something that you have. So yeah, you've got you do have a very specific approach. There's numbers. There's people. You probably have a monitoring and evaluation team, right, tracking all of these things, and there is inspiring language that gets used, right? That sort of talks about revitalizing communities, right, and families, and that's those sorts of things. But then there's also like very sort of business type, quantifiable description of how the improvement is going, right? Both types of talk happening at the organization, right?
Yeah, I remember, to your point, it's probably my second year of my job, right around in there. I've been here in a little over 5 years, and I was seeing some, kind of a senior Atlanta business leader, great guy who's a chairman of a bank.
Mm-hmm.
And I, went through, and I, back to some of the previous work I had done was, using PowerPoint slides and this metric, that metrics, and kind of went through our strategy and where we were, and I got to the end of it. And because he was someone I respect and also trust, I said, well, what do you think of my presentation? Like, he said, John, the kind of the what of it is great, but there's no inspiration in this. There's no,
Yep.
you spoke to my mom, but you didn't speak to my heart. It was great advice, because then I'm like, because then it was going out and really getting, testimonies of folks who we're working with and others that could speak to the heart. So it was a great early lesson for me, because I had really, my previous work really had just really sharpened the approach of, focusing on the mind, so to speak.
I think it's a great lesson for everybody. For everybody listening, I think no matter what work you're doing, particularly if you're writing proposals, trying to raise money, or just in general working at a nonprofit, we do need both of these conversations. I sometimes call it so there's this Good Morning America, right, and then there's 60 Minutes, and we have to have both programs. You got to do the long form, hard hitting journalism that exposes the bad, and then but also people have to wake up and get inspired to start their day each morning, right? It can't be all one or the other. Some organizations can be just one. There are purely inspiring, like Make-A-Wish Foundation, for instance. It's they don't have the kind of people housed metrics, right? But they still raise a lot of money because that inspiration is very meaningful to a lot of people. I think this is just it's a very important lesson, particularly for people who are fundraising, to think about. And I think with you there, right? You probably talk to some people where you're going to want to lean heavy on the inspirational stuff, and others where you're going to want to lean heavy on the numbers. As CEO of the organization, which do you find yourself doing more often?
That's a great question, and I don't. It's me probably really thinking through, because it depends on on the audience that I'm.
You make sure to know who you're talking to and come up with the appropriate.
So for example, a lot of our, call it angel money, so to speak. When we first launched, we had plans but no results.
Yeah.
So folks had to.
That's true for pretty much everybody. You can't have results until you start.
Exactly, but and some of the early funding came from some key Atlanta corporations.
Yeah.
And so we're about 5 years, and so I've been recently revisiting with some of the CEOs, and so I have 30 minutes, and I really focus on the results with them, because they're appropriately so. They're using often shareholder money as philanthropy. They want to know, you got to talk about ROI. So I use a little bit of inspiration at the end, as opposed to when I'm doing, we do tours now of the work in the neighborhoods. And when I'm giving a tour, it will be heavy on what I would say inspiration, because those are more individual donors who are more, want to be inspired, to kind of give their personal gift.
Yes, when you're giving an individual donor a tour of the site, that is when you lean heavy on the inspiration. Yeah. Unless they happen to be asking a lot of questions about numbers.
Yeah, because one thing I learned too about philanthropy, right? Nearly most of all of people in philanthropy, I don't think, if your basic necessities aren't met, chances are you're not a real big philanthropist. Right? It's very human, right? You want to take care of yourself, care of your family. But once you're at a point like, I have kind of whatever you define as more than enough, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, what do I want to spend my money on? Do I want to spend my money on really good meal? Do I want to spend my money on another car? Do I want to spend money on another big? But if you're going to spend, chances are you're not going to spend your money on something to feel bad. Like, let me write a check on something and just feel horrible. Like, let me pick that. Right. So that's what I've come to appreciate is when people write a check, they want to feel good. Just like if you wrote a check going to a 5-star, I don't mean that to sound, but I've come to appreciate people want to be inspired and they want to feel good when they're writing, giving their money away.
Yes, absolutely. And so the one way I've described it, right, is it's sales, but instead of selling them a product, you're selling them change. There's change they want to see in the world. And they're going to use some of their excess money, right, to try to purchase that change. And that change, and I think particularly an issue like yours, it must be a constant balance between inspirational talk. You don't want to go overboard, right? You don't want to start exaggerating your impact, right, or getting into what my father would have called happy horse shit, right? Right, but you also don't want to be too dire. The problem of housing is quite dire, right? People living on the street, families being ruined, and things like that. You don't want to go too negative on it either. That doesn't get people excited to support the program. Difficult tightrope to walk.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think if you're going to solve an intractable problem like housing, right, it's going to involve walking tightropes.
Yeah, and our work where we are in Atlanta, is right at the intersection of race.
Yes.
So the neighborhoods that we are focused, um, after the Civil War, and remember Atlanta was burned because of its supply usefulness to the Confederacy. And after the Civil War, when the federal troops were still here, there were limited places that blacks were allowed to own land. One of those places was on the west side. When the federal troops left, right, then the South, locked down again with segregation. Again, so the west side, populated as black neighborhoods. But we're, all the things people are now much more familiar with, redlining and the discrimination, et cetera, all that. Back in 1960, the neighborhoods were about 50,000, overwhelmingly black. They depopulated down to about 15,000. But now, the affordable housing is also interlaid with issues of historical, rectifying historical injustice of people who weren't able to own houses or land, or it was taken. So one of the things we do not only with our housing is we have a program around community retention guidelines, so who gets our housing? People from the neighborhoods, connect the neighborhoods, went to one of the historically black colleges. So that part of the narrative is not just about affordable housing, but who benefits from that affordable housing and the why behind it.
Yes, absolutely. So in preparing for the interview, because I'm not from Atlanta, I reached out to a few folks who are, and I just sort of generally asked them what they were. I mentioned Westside Future Fund and just sort of generally chatted with them. The one thing that came up, I talked to three different folks, people whose proposals we've reviewed from Atlanta. So these are folks who are actively fundraising in Atlanta. Their main interest was on just what you said, right? The all right, how is this actually helping the people who have historically lived in those communities, or have attended the historically black colleges, or the actual culture and flavor of that part of town? Because all three of them who come from different parts of Atlanta, they all were pretty clear that that's a part of town that does have culture and roots, and that they should be maintained. The Atlanta does have history of some successful community revitalization projects. My father is, in fact, a golf course historian. He's written a couple books about country clubs and golf courses. And once upon a time, as I understand from him, the first thing he mentioned was that the East Lake Country Club and the revitalization of that neighborhood is generally considered a case study of successful community revitalization. That's different. It's East Lake. I assume that's the east part of Atlanta, different neighborhood.
Correct.
But it seems to me that your approach is somewhat similar, because it sort of coincides with another sport, the sporting venue, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And you also got a lot of high-level important people of Atlanta involved. Right? Bobby Jones was involved in the East Lake revitalization. For golf historians, if you're not a golfer, he's one of the more famous. He's probably I'm certainly the most famous golfer from Atlanta, and one of the most famous golfers of all time. And he was also a lawyer in the Atlanta area. But obviously, neighborhoods are different. And looking through the creation of the Westside Future Fund, I saw a few things that I'm eager to chat through. One is that you were involved in the creation of it. You were the executive director of something called the Atlanta Committee for Progress, and that the Westside Future Fund is what I think, and feel free to correct me, what some would call a P3, a public-private partnership, because there's corporations, governments, and private funders. So I'd love to hear you talk about how that all came about, right? The formation of a public-private partnership sounds complex to me. Those are three different types of organizations with different goals and things that they're looking for, right? Different levels of metrics or inspiration that they'll want to hear, right? And it's neat to me that you were actually there, involved in the creation of it, and now running the eventual organization. So talk me through the last, I guess you say Westside Future Fund's been around 5 years. And I suppose it probably took a couple of years to get that all together. So I guess talk to me about the last 7 or 8 years. particularly the first few years and how you got it all, how got all the stakeholders involved.
So early on, when I was running the Atlanta Committee for Progress, when then Mayor Kasim Reed, along with Arthur Blank, announced the location of the new stadium, because at the time they'd been planning the dome, time for a new stadium, where was it going to be? There was some, and when they announced, which was right next to the current one, which has now been torn down, they also announced the neighborhoods immediately west of the stadium, which are some of Atlanta's poorest, ones we're focused in, to refocus on those neighborhoods. And at the time, the mayor planned 15 million of city funds. Arthur Blank pledged 15 million of philanthropy.
Just for folks perhaps not from Atlanta, Arthur Blank is the founder of Home Depot.
Yep,
and he made some excess wealth from that company.
I think very well documented excess wealth on the Forbes billionaire list. So he had his own family foundation, Arthur and Blank Family Foundation. And so at the time, we were running the ACP, and I remember I went to Penny McPhee, who then was the president and CEO of the foundation, saying, because some of the corporate CEOs on the ACP were interested, like, well, how do we help? Like, how can we help with that? And one talked to Penny and said, do y'all have a plan? And would you like us to kind of work on this? And she went and talked to her and came back, well, yeah, we would. So then which was kind of a methodology of the ACP, we put together a task force. It was very quiet, but a couple of key ACP members, along with some pro bono consulting to think through, because we had a view, it's going to need some kind of organization to drive it long term. It's not a short term fix, so to speak.
Right.
So we went through, looked at different organizations, learned a lot, to your earlier point, about from Eastlake, and then all the work they've done through their model called Purpose Built, and learned about, and then so the Westside Future Fund then was launched by then Mayor Kasim Reed and some of the corporate community right at the end of 2014. And then some of the startup funding came from ACP companies. But it was it kind of then back ended into the community involvement, right? It didn't start that way, right? But started it as a partnership between really the mayor and the key leadership of the corporate community of Atlanta, along with Arthur Blank, to focus in on these neighborhoods.
Okay, so Arthur Blank wants a new stadium. Mm-hmm. And the mayor also wants one. In general, there's a decent history of stadiums improving neighborhoods. When we built in DC, when we built where the Nationals play, that neighborhood improved drastically and quickly. And I imagine there were NGOs involved with that. So the Atlanta Committee of Progress is it mostly CEOs of businesses working on, right, trying to keep Atlanta progressing? What was the mission there?
CEOs and university presidents.
Oh, okay.
Some of the university, but it was.
So they hear about the project with the stadium, and they start asking you, right? How can we get involved with that?
Correct.
That's very. So one of the things I found that is that just because a guy like Arthur Blank runs a big foundation, or like people, or someone's running a large foundation for. You mentioned you reached out to the professional that runs the foundation that works for Mr. Blank. They sometimes foundations aren't as well networked as we imagine. Right. I think a lot of times in our mind, right, the big foundations, they know all the other foundations and they can have convenings and do the work of this sort. But oftentimes I found that actually folks like yourself running NGOs that have advisory boards and things like that have a lot to offer to someone trying to do work of that sort. It sounds like that was the case. You came to them and you say, hey, I've got these CEOs, I've got these university presidents, I've done this great work building this organization. How can we help you in your goals? That's a good position to be in when you're approaching a philanthropist. You're not asking for things. You came there with a team ready to help.
Well, see, it's even better. At the time, she was on the board of the ACP.
Okay, yeah. But you were established in the community, right? Well, you had done the work of becoming well networked and getting the appropriate people involved, which allowed you to dive into the conversation.
Correct. Yeah. No, the ACP, the board of the ACP is university presidents, other business leaders, and also corporate CEOs. They're headquartered in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And it's the actual CEOs. It's not their.
Yeah.
They themselves participate.
Yeah. Cool.
Which gives, marry that up with the mayor of Atlanta, right? That's some serious leadership leverage, so to speak.
Yes, I mean that's what you need. However, right, the mayor's changed. That guy's not mayor anymore, right? I think maybe you've had a couple since then. What is it? What is it like when, right? How are you affected by like political change like that? Does it affect the work of the organization? Do you have to change your approach when the administration changes?
No, the the I mean the early risk, and to some of the folks sound like you might have checked in with in advance of this interview, was given how this was launched, given the way I look, when I came in, I was the second executive director, and the first one left after 6 months. But was there concern that this was, a gentrification play, so to speak, right?
Yep.
Or,
For those listening, John looks like a white guy.
right? Because I am. I mean, that would be
If you were to
accurate.
picture a white guy, you're probably picturing very close to John.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, and this is a neighborhood that Dr. King's from, that is historically.
Yeah.
So people were understandable. Why is this white guy going to be doing
and
this?
concerned that because part of the challenge of when a neighborhood depopulates, because when we did the work, most of the folks that were still living in the neighborhoods were renters from private investors. And so people that live in the neighborhood want the amenities of a well-established neighborhood, but then that has an unintended consequence of driving up real estate prices and pushing people out.
Yep.
So a lot of the early work was ensuring that both from a policy and political perspective, it wasn't seen as helping benefit people who didn't have historical ties to the neighborhood. So once our programs were rolling out in such a way that they didn't do that, when I have to say, when Keisha Lance Bottoms came on as mayor, she was very supportive.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we actually had a mayoral forum with the two runoff candidates on Friday, Andrea Dickens and Felicia Moore. Both were very supportive. But that's because of the work that we're doing, both from a policy perspective and obviously from a political perspective. Both those things, I think, marry up well.
You hold forums, and the candidates come and you ask them questions?
Yeah, well, I had a local reporter moderate it. Her name is Rose Scott. She's reporter at WABE, and she moderated the discussion between the two candidates.
Very interesting. I think that's really interesting thing for you to be doing. Keeps you relevant in the community. It's on mission, right? And if you get these, I've seen some of these candidate forums in other communities become like extremely powerful events, right? The candidates have to show up and answer your questions, or they don't win, right?
Yeah, no, it's a great way to, and also establishing, alignment, because the work that I'm doing, the philanthropy, they're raising philanthropy, as you know, is that we need the political. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do my job if we had the mayor of Atlanta was saying this is a bad idea.
Yeah,
would be very challenging,
right,
to overcome.
Yep.
Because especially in the work that we're doing, a lot of times it's, traditionally people think of, well, that's areas that government should be doing the work, right? So it's having government participation is critical for what we're doing, because otherwise people are like, why are we doing it if they're not at all participating, so to speak, from a public perspective.
And I think you might also end up running into things where like you would need the government. So like, for instance, in DC, we have they currently, I don't know all of the issues are related to this, but they're a lot of the activists are talking about the encampment clearings, right? The government is coming and clearing these homeless encampments, right? And that's it's a government action taking place. So the NGOs can do all they want to oppose it, but they can't literally stop the police from, right, clearing the encampments. Right? If you've got the mayor on your side, maybe you can't actually, right? You don't get to tell the mayor what to do, but you've got the more access. To my knowledge, and perhaps there is something in DC similar to what you're doing, but not to my knowledge. Since you spent some time here, I know you weren't. Doesn't sound like you were working on local issues up here. But what are some of the differences that you see between the two towns? I mean, some things are very similar, right? They're capitals here. Not capital, but large, right, center for a place that has headquarters, right? You have large corporate headquarters. We usually have the government affairs division of those companies, right? So all the big companies have an office in DC. And in fact, we're getting one of the world's largest companies is going to make their HQ2 in our town soon, so we're going to become more of a corporate town. But we have historically Black College Howard, other universities there, large Black population, right? They love Dr. King in both towns. What are some of the differences and similarities you see between DC and Atlanta?
Well, it's been a bit, but it's not there, but I suspect
DC's on the news every day, so hopefully.
it's still true. No, but one thing I distinctly remember about DC for me was whenever you would walk into a party, or I would walk into a party and observe, folks mainly focused on what do you do?
Yeah, that's the DC question. What do you do?
And then I work for such and such company. It's like, well, what position? Because everyone knew, like, where do you fall? So that was an immediate classification of your relative power in the city, right? Like, oh, you're just a measly legislative assistant as opposed to, something else. And the other thing that struck me, and it was probably amongst the circles I was in, is that everyone was there for their career, which I'm not. No one was there to help DC be a better city. So that that sense of community, like everyone was there for, DC was just a way to get to something else. So that was
for a large, and I'm sure you're aware that's a large. Not because there are a lot of people who come there and are there for that reason and don't really treat it like home. In the back of their mind, they know they're going to be going somewhere else eventually, right? There is a local population.
Oh, no.
But you're right. When you go there like we did, we both went there for professional reasons. Someone told us it was a good place to get work. There's lots of young people around the country that get told go to the capital city for work, right? And we go there and we're not necessarily as locally focused while we're there. Or we're not as familiar with the local issues. For me, I came from Maine. Different DC is from rural Maine. Like it's basically unrecognizable. It was like going to a different planet. I was learning about all kinds of new stuff. I obviously couldn't just dive in and start helping with local issues in the same way that I could in my hometown. In Atlanta, you're right, you've identified the DC question that has not changed. People, you should, sometimes when I tell people I run a nonprofit, they're very interested in that. Other times I literally see the life go out of their eyes and they walk away from me, right? The other thing I noticed is when they work on the Hill, there's a lot of people who will just say, they're aware of the game you're talking about, so they just say, I'm on the Hill. I work on the Hill. It's very difficult to get even the name of the congressman or what they do or work on or whatever. What's the Atlanta question? What's the first, when you go to a party in Atlanta, what's the first question folks ask? They don't ask what you do?
No, that's in there for sure. It's probably like, where are you from? More of a kind of a lot of folks from Atlanta aren't, what's the same thing, not from Atlanta. A lot of people moved here. So it's, where are you from? Where do you live? Is it Atlanta? You say Atlanta, but Atlanta.
Oh, it's big. There's a lot of neighborhood pride, I imagine.
Yeah, a lot of kind of sub areas, so to speak, or others. Yeah, so there's, once you, where do you live? It says something to someone if you live in such and such a neighborhood as opposed to some other such and such a neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those would probably be some of the first. I'm not. We talked earlier about soccer. Football is big in Atlanta. I didn't go to a football high school or a football college. Emory has no football college. So if you're a man, sports quickly gets into the conversations, which I'm always coming up short on because I don't follow it as closely as some other people.
Yeah, that's tough. It takes. So when I started running the nonprofit, I had to make some choices, right, about my what I do in my free time. One of the things that I did cut was being a dedicated sports fan because of how much. I think the conversation is a little inane, right? And then the only sports conversation I'm generally interested in is the social justice stuff, and that's just all very frustrating. And you also regularly find out that some of your heroes aren't actually very good people. Right? I grew up paying attention to John Gruden, who recently turns out he's just not a good person, probably hasn't been the entire time, right? And I wonder if and I'll say my life is not any less full now that I don't follow sports as closely, right? But the folks I did talk to from Atlanta, they all mentioned sports. They all wanted to talk about the Falcons, or right. That as I understand, the Braves have won a championship. Yeah. Congratulations to you for that.
Yeah, very happy about that.
I remember I was briefly a Fairweather Braves fan back when the last time they won they were in 95, I think they won a championship. Right. I was 13 or 14, and that was just I remember all the pitchers were really good. It's just a really fun team to watch. In general, one of the things that really came up to me, I think, in terms of big differences, is much larger. in terms of population, and also that you have some of the world's largest, best known companies headquartered, not just headquartered there, but that actually that seem to care about Atlanta quite a bit. Seem to be somewhat Atlanta focused with their philanthropy and development plans.
Yeah, and I think that Atlanta seems to have a good. When I ran the ACP, one of the things, because I would work with some of the corporate CEOs who weren't from Atlanta, but they would remark about that ethos that Atlanta had a very engaged, corporate community.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that's obviously a big? You've got most of the big companies are involved with Westside Future Fund. It's obviously very helpful, but corporations have bottom lines. My guess is they're not involved in this because they want to make less money, right?
No, so it's not a long-term formula to be a.
Yeah, in fact, even running the nonprofit as I do, I know that if you spend more money than you bring in, eventually you go out of business. It's a mathematical reality for everyone, right? And so, and there are ways that philanthropy and development can improve a company's bottom line. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, there's ways that a company doing their business can improve outcomes and stuff. Companies employ people and give benefits and tuition and healthcare and all kinds of stuff. But again, are there ways you find that you must? I'm trying to think of the right way to think of this question. Do you engage with your donors that don't have a bottom line much differently than you engage with your corporate partners? Do you find yourself talking to the corporate partners about their business?
Yeah. Corporate funders, especially those that are publicly traded.
Yeah, I mean they respond. They have to. They have a fiscal responsibility,
right? Because they're giving away literally
shareholders' money that they're donating to you.
Yeah. And so does that, when they typically want to be public about it, and they typically want that to reinforce their own business, right? Mm-hmm. Which is absolutely nothing wrong with that, given where the money's coming from. So as an example, we actually announced it yesterday. We were lucky enough to receive a $1.5 million charitable contribution from Cadence Bank.
Very nice.
And specifically for our Home on the West Side program, they're particularly interested in the down payment assistance part of it. But serving this market is something they're very committed to doing. They actually talked to us about potentially opening a branch up in the neighborhoods. So it was charitable, but also spoke to their own corporate commitment to to be serving this market in this part of town. So
yeah. I mean, and I think that there's a lot of folks fundraisers that would be very uncomfortable, generally uncomfortable with that. I remember when I was working at a conservation organization a long time ago, when it first became trendy for conservation organizations to raise corporate dollars. For a very long time, conservation was basically entirely anti-corporate, and much more like save the snowy owl, right? There's those sorts of things from individual donors. Not for nothing, they did save the snowy owl. They're doing just that. That species is doing just fine, but they were able to raise a lot more money, and they've started to have more impact. And I think this is an important part of reaching all of our climate goals. Was once they convinced companies that sustainability could help them raise more money, right? If you this isn't just about saving these species and you donating money and you making less money, right? You can actually your company can make more money with more sustainable climate practices, and that a lot of the NGOs changed their tact, and some conservationists were uncomfortable with that. That had been their opponent for a very long time. But I mean, there's a lot of people that would tell you that if you can make your opponent your ally, you'll be much more successful. And in general, these companies aren't bad. They're not evil enterprises, right? They just have a slightly different entity model and have to pay attention to their shareholders and other things, which allows them to have more capital, have more reach, get more done, and they make really great partners for somebody like you. But it involves a different fundraising approach.
Bring it back to one of your earlier questions about Dr. King. So Dr. King's quote, kind of speaking this a little bit, sure. If hate does not drive out hate, only love drives out hate.
Did Dr. King have a lot of corporate partners?
Well, some of the folks that to your earlier point gave him donations, were corporate.
Yep.
So
well, he would go. I think everybody knows that he went around the country giving speeches, right? I think everybody's aware Dr. King gave the occasional speech. At the end of the speech, he would often ask for money, right? And I've actually seen there's some fundraising. There's a fundraising letter you can look up. It's in a museum or whatever. He wrote it to someone who ran a business, and in the letter he mentions like, I know your business is doing very well, right? Imagine how well you would do when like all citizens are free. He like makes a really good, strong argument, and he's deliberately talking about the business, right? Why this donation will help the guy with his business. And so, if Dr. King thought it was appropriate, I don't think every people should be as shy about it. Lots of times, though, nonprofit founders, people who go into the nonprofit space, did so because they didn't fit they don't want to work in a corporate environment, right? A lot of the buzzwords and other things, press release language and stuff and I think just in general, right, try to get over those things, find areas you can work with, right, know where to put your foot down, other things. Makes a lot of sense to me that a local bank in Atlanta would want to be involved in your work, right? And particularly, you mentioned, right, one of the main programs you have is a down payment assistance program. So that's got to help the bank in some way, right? If you're helping
Yeah.
folks do their
Well,
mortgages
they
and
want
own
to,
homes,
their one of their core businesses would be mortgages.
right? So talk to me about how do you you call it the down payment assistance program?
Mhm.
How exactly does that work?
So the down payment assistance is for those that qualify against our, community retention guidelines. So that's first, and you also then need to qualify for underwriting. So underwriting meaning you qualify for a mortgage. So folks that, making 55, 60, 45, typical people call it workforce housing, can qualify for underwriting, but that mortgage is typically around 200, 210, somewhere in there. But given where land prices are in the West Side and bill costs, that doesn't put you into a home. And so when we were, putting together folks that were qualifying for mortgages, the down payment assistance programs offered by, the city and the public sector typically would total between 20 and 30, but it wasn't enough to close that gap. We need to get it closer to 300,000. And so then we layered in with our philanthropy on top of the public down payment assistance. Depending on someone's income, we'll provide up to $60,000 on top of the public. So you're looking at potentially 80K, 90K worth of buy down between the public funds and our philanthropy. The other thing about our philanthropy is, and a lot of the folks, because of our guidelines, our guidelines are first-time home buyers, and that our down payment assistance burns down over 10 years at 10% a year. So if you sold halfway through, you got to pay us half of it back. But at the end of 10, so that's an enormous.
And you're keeping people in the community that way.
Well, we're keeping and also helping people, move back. So one of our single family homes women qualify for underwriting, was a Spelman graduate of Spelman College, which is one of our criteria. Another one was a Morehouse. So as we, back to repopulating the neighborhoods, right, which is part of, getting the neighborhoods depopulated, you wanted to repopulate, but bringing people that have a historic connection to the neighborhoods back into it.
Very interesting. I have a few more questions for you, and I'll let you get on with your day. You've got a lot of work over there on the West Side. We talked a little bit about your when you were forming. You said you did the research. I mentioned Eastlake and stuff. Were there pre-existing organizations or efforts that you looked to when you were forming the Westside Future Fund, or are there any now that you continue to look to as peer leaders in the field? These could be organizations outside of Atlanta, or they don't have to be in DC or anywhere. Are there housing related nonprofits or others that you admire, look to for inspiration?
One that gave us it was after we formed, and we were really trying to, unpack the, development part of the model, the housing part of the model. We learned a tremendous amount from an organization called 3CDC in Cincinnati.
So what is it called?
3CDC.
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 Okay.
And they focus on a particular neighborhood in Cincinnati in their downtown area called Over the Rhine. And what we learned from them, they had primarily through their corporate community led by Proctor, created a corporate-backed impact fund that underwrote, 3CDC's acquisition development activities by the corporate community providing funds, but they want those funds back. They weren't philanthropy. And so we learned from that. They were very generous in helping us, duplicate that in Atlanta. And so we got 10 Atlanta corporations that take cash off their balance sheet where they want a return of their capital, but not on their capital. And so, and it's also very flexible and providing, we actually advise it, and it also, provides very, very low cost loans to the Westside Future Fund, as well as some other partners in the community that really amplifies the impact of the philanthropy and the public funds. But that was something we really are grateful, and we learned from 3CDC. I mentioned earlier, all the learning we're taking from Purpose Built in terms of the kind of holistic approach that we're doing.
That's right. So people in Cincinnati helped you find housing for folks on the west side of Atlanta. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because Atlanta, a way for corporations to basically use cash on their balance sheet that they're not, maybe in an investment account or something. That's how. So it's a great way for them to help without showing up on the P&L as a donation.
Yes. Speaking of donations, sometimes the folks that donate to you are just simply donating the money. Arthur Blank he's donated to his foundation. The money he's not expecting the return.
Sure.
Corporate partners might make a donation and not technically be expecting a return on that donation, but they'll be looking somewhere else in their business to see improvement or other things.
And all of them have done both. So a huge investor in our work is the Home Depot.
Yes.
So the Home Depot has contributed, philanthropy to our housing program. They've also contributed philanthropy to other not-for-profits.
So the company contributes.
The corporate
and the foundation set up by the founder.
The Home Depot Foundation, which is the corporate foundation.
But he also, you mentioned he has an individual foundation.
Yeah. Well, Arthur Blank's gone. He left the Home Depot probably 15 years ago.
Sure.
But he, Mr. Blank is, had a second run of a very successful business career with the Falcons. He owns PGA stores. So he's got his own family foundation, but that's from his own net worth.
Right.
But we've had support from the Delta Airlines corporate foundation, from the Coca-Cola Foundation, as well as independent, individuals and independent foundations.
Interesting to me that the I imagine somewhat different when you're the Home Depot Foundation versus Arthur M. Blank Foundation, even though ultimately the same individual. He moved on now with the family. That's much more about his family and perhaps other family members, what they're looking for. Home Depot, like we said, is a company. That foundation is set up with a very specific mission to complement the company. Good for you for getting into both for getting in with both. It doesn't have to be a current donor outside of Atlanta or whatever. Is there a particular donor like Mr. Blank, right? Lots of donors are using multiple vehicles these days, being creative with their approaches, trying to do things like, in addition to buying to redoing the stadium, also thinking about the community. Like lots of donors are thinking in that sort of way. Is there any donor foundation that you particularly admire? Perhaps that isn't funding you now that you would like to, right? If you want to call out a prospect or whatever. But is there anyone who's giving or approach to giving that you particularly admire?
Oh, you're asking me to pick favorites among children, given all my favorites.
I mean, you can, if you want, you can list one of your own donors. I'm sure they'll like to hear that, right? But we do have a decent number of philanthropists and program offices and foundations that listen to the show. Are there any practices that you'd like to tell them about?
Practices.
It seems to me, so I perhaps I'm not asking that question correctly. You have done a lot of really interesting work. Traditionally, funders have a very specific approach. So they might be like, we fund homeless shelters in Atlanta, right? And we've been doing it since the 70s or whatever, right? You come in with a slightly different approach that's working with the companies or whatever. A traditional foundation that doesn't take meetings, doesn't accept invitations, right, and other things. It would have been very difficult for you to get in front of them, perhaps impossible, right? In order to get Westside Future Fund created, there must have been folks willing to hear to hear about different approaches, perhaps things that they had not heard of. Right. One of the things that's true here at Unfunded List is a lot of people think that if they could just get in front of the donor, right, to tell them their new approach, right, they would hear it. Right. And that makes things very difficult for funders, right? You want to have a good strategy. You want to say, here's the kinds of things we like to fund, but you also you don't want to close the door to new ideas, right? Like, what are you, right? Yeah, I realize you've got your shoes busy. Your agenda is probably full running the Westside Future Fund, but if you were an Arthur Blank type philanthropist, right, how would you be going about things?
In terms of giving away money?
Yeah, would you set up a family foundation? Would you be focusing on housing? What kinds of things would you do as a mega billionaire donor?
Well, if I were a mega billionaire donor, whose approach I really admire is, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife.
Yet she just gave a large round of grants. I'm still holding out hope.
Could
be few. Did you get? I mean, it might have been. She gave to a lot of organizations. I haven't read the full list. Did you get any money from her?
Fund, but she gave to historically black colleges that are in her.
Yes.
She gave. I know she gave to Clark, Spelman, and Morehouse.
She gave to several of our partners, and in fact, one of the groups we reviewed this year got $12 million from her, like a week before I gave them the feedback.
Right.
And I'm wondering, like, are they going to read this feedback? They just got $12 million. What do they want all my critical feedback for? But that was very interesting. She came out of nowhere. Most of the organizations weren't expecting these large gifts. Usually if you receive $12 million, you've been talking to the foundation for a long time and figuring out how that works. And I think she's going to continue giving like that for a while because she has more money to give.
Well, yeah, man, I love her approach because she clearly has some passion areas that speak to her, that she wants to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And, objectively speaking, the areas she's targeting really do need help. She's not given to institutions that already have multi-billion-dollar endowments.
I don't think she did. She might have.
But yeah, well, you look at some.
If she did, it would have been the center for this at Stanford, right? Not someone that doesn't have access to the huge.
And she's not after, as far as any kind of, not that there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but any ego recognition.
I did notice that there were a lot of the organizations that got grants did issue press releases and such thanking the donor. I don't. Those might have been all spontaneous. It might have been a condition of the gift or whatever. And again, there isn't. If you're giving that much money away, you should get the recognition. You want people to know what you're doing. You're trying to make some change. The anonymous donors is a strategy that can work for a lot of folks, but there's also something to be said for talking about your giving as well.
Sure.
I think she probably inspired other people to give to those organizations.
Yeah, and I didn't receive one of the gifts, but I know at least from reading about it, they're unrestricted. So once the money shows up, she trusts them to do the right thing with it.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
That's cool too.
Unrestricted dollars are terrific. Everybody likes that. I imagine you have some restricted grants.
Most of our grants are restricted.
Yeah, but you're doing very specific work, and they get restricted after long conversation with the donors, and they're restricted in a way that you're okay with, right?
Yeah, I mean, and to some extent, we developed a program to speak to that, knowing it was going to be restricted. So how knowing most funders don't like to just give unrestricted gifts.
I believe it is the majority of grants still from foundations are restricted in some way, which is largely because of medical research. Yeah, that's the number one issue funded, and obviously they restrict it to the specific disease or whatever. One of the things about restricted funds is I like to remind all donors, any donors that might be listening, if you put the restrictions on it in the first place, you can also remove those. So like if a global pandemic comes along and you want to free up some of the restricted dollars, you can do that. So restricting isn't as restrictive as we might imagine. They're more like guidelines. The SEC doesn't come along and enforce these restrictions. They're between the donor and the giver. And that is in fact exactly what happened during the pandemic. A lot of people unrestricted and eased funds and allowed for change, and that's a very good practice for donors. But it is Mackenzie Scott giving away that much money all in large unrestricted gifts is very interesting. I imagine when you give personally, and hopefully you give personally. I've never had anyone on the show be like, no, I do not give. What kind of things do you support personally with your personal dollars? Giving Tuesday is, I believe, a week from today, so you'll want to be thinking about this.
Well, I think it's important given I'm out there, but I give to the Westside Future Fund.
Do you do? Yes. I also give to unfunded list.
Because if I'm asking other people to believe in it,
Yeah, of course.
so, and then once another thing I do too, because then, learning more about, because I live in the neighborhoods, I live in a neighborhood called Vine City, but, learning about some of the, challenges that individuals face. So, like I'll just, help people that I meet or work on, more kind of granular focus as opposed to a big organization.
You help folks in the neighborhood individually.
Yeah. Like as an example.
You don't get a deduction for that.
No, that's, but like, my neighbor her name is, well, maybe, I don't think she'd mind, but I won't say her name, but she's
Sure.
in her 80s and she lives alone. And when I met her, one thing, and she, I think lives on a Social Security monthly check, but one thing she was, worried about was if I fall down in the night, who's going to call 911?
Right.
Like I'm not by, and she didn't even know about the things you can wear around your neck.
Life alert. Right.
So I got one of those for her, and there's and it's on a cellular, so there's like a monthly charge for it. I mean, it's not,
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's very nice.
But like that would be an example, like of trying to just, meet someone and then help with, a need that I can lead into.
Very good. So it is the morning of a Tuesday, and we'll be wrapping up soon. You have other work today. What's the most exciting thing on today's to-do list after this?
The most exciting thing on today's to-do list.
You're meeting with the mayor or something? Anything cool?
No, I'm not meeting with. I can't. I've got staff meetings. Getting ready to shut down for Thanksgiving.
How many folks do you have working for you?
The Westside Future Fund total staff, including me, is 14.
14? And so, you lead the staff meetings?
Yeah.
You all meet, are you guys coming into the office?
Right now it's voluntary, which means there's really not many people in the office.
Yeah.
I'm in the office.
Uh-huh.
So.
So you'll be doing a Zoom staff meeting today?
Actually, we do our staff meetings on Wednesday. So tomorrow we'll have a Zoom staff meeting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, everyone's like, back to my age. Where's that? The Partridge Family that, when they started with in the beginning.
That was the Brady Bunch.
Brady Bunch. Which
was off the air by the time I was born, but I did see reunions, reruns.
Well, that's what I feel like my staff meetings are, because they have like beginning looking at everything.
Yes, there is the most of my meetings and such are that. I am speaking to a couple folks whose proposals we reviewed later today, and we always do that over Zoom or Google Meet. My program wouldn't really be possible if it weren't for like being able to connect like this. I mean, not that long ago, if you wrote a grant proposal, you had to print it out and actually mail it to the grant maker. They were really slow to accept proposals online. Like most companies were emailing long after the foundations were accepting their submissions online. And so back then, right, the committees met in person to make decisions. Like I never would have been able to like get the feedback together on all these submissions from all over the world and then actually talk to the applicants. Let alone interview all the great philanthropists and other professionals through the podcast. It's very interesting being able to talk to you. I'm going to ask a couple big questions and then we're going to let you go. Prepare for tomorrow's staff meeting and everything. So right away, we're going to start with a really big question. What's the biggest problem you think today's philanthropists can realistically solve? You're working on affordable housing, and I would understand if you think that's the answer, but only if you think it's something that today's philanthropists, folks giving and working on the issues today, can realistically solve. Do you think housing is that issue, or is there another issue? What's the biggest problem facing people that givers and professionals like yourself can realistically solve in our lives?
Well, that's a great question. Well, the way I've always thought about, for me, on philanthropy, because I've always, focused a lot around issues around systemic poverty.
Yeah.
And, if you raise the minimum wage, that would have a huge impact on minimum wage, right?
Yep.
In
That's
Georgia
you
still.
need the government. Philanthropists can't. I mean, I guess they could supplement wages and stuff, but that's
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. There's not enough money for that, right? And so you look at the child tax credit they did as part of the American Recovery Act.
yeah.
There's not that much philanthropy going out the door a year in terms of alleviating child poverty, right? So so my point though, but what I find interesting about philanthropy is demonstrating a path that shows something can work, and then public sector could move in more, aggressively, right?
Like
And
public libraries, for instance. Carnegie showed them that public libraries could work, and now
right,
pretty much every community expects a public library.
yeah, and you take in the case of affordable housing, because it really, think about it, housing for all. If you're going to have a great community, you need to make sure you have housing for all, and why that's so essential. So hopefully, because the philanthropy is anywhere close to the government money, but
They're
demonstrating.
getting there.
Yeah.
Some of the really rich folks are getting government type money.
Yeah, and a lot of things too we do, and specifically the housing, because we'd like to see more government money, is for very good reasons. The government can't buy above appraised value on land.
Yeah, as
Well,
a
if you're an
taxpayer, I
investor
would be
in
opposed
an
to it.
area where Microsoft just announced their second
Yeah.
headquarters, guess what land prices are not selling at?
Yeah.
And so philanthropy, we go out and buy stuff above, we don't go crazy. We can buy above appraised value, but then the partnership with the public sector on the rehab and helping us, that's the power of, okay, we can use philanthropy to go get things done the public money can't get done, but then once we do it, come in behind us. So that's what I find interesting about
Yeah,
philanthropy.
I like that too. So I think you said earlier, philanthropists can sort of show the path, and then the public sector can then follow on that path.
Because philanthropy can take risk, government can't move quicker, innovation.
Yeah.
So that's what I always found interesting about, for me, on the philanthropy was that aspect of it.
So
Because
groups
I've always
of
been interested in the kind of
philanthropists.
public policy issues for me.
So philanthropists taking risks, doing innovations and stuff, eventually figure out a model to make housing affordable for everybody in a community like Atlanta, and then from there the governments see that path and they start taking it everywhere, and everybody lives in a home. That's how we'll do it.
Well,
It doesn't sound that unreal. I don't know. The way I just said it didn't sound that pie in the sky, right?
No, that would be a terrific version that you demonstrate, because back to, you gave some of the examples of Dr. King, what he raised money for. People today would be like, you don't need to raise money for that because it just is.
Right. You don't need to do a bus boycott.
Yeah. So
Maybe you should. Maybe there's probably some places where you could reconsider those things. Like I said, you're involved in a big partnership between public players, private players, philanthropists, and stuff. And so I've got a 4-part question for you, right? And if you feel free to answer it however you want. You don't have to give me 4 distinct answers. But what problems should corporations be solving? What problems should the government be solving? What problems should philanthropists be solving? And then which problems should all 3 be working together? Assumedly, you think affordable housing is one where they should all work together. But are there there's other issues other than affordable. Once everybody's housed, we'll still have work to do. Particularly around, this is because we review for lots of different companies. This comes up a lot. In Canada, they expect different things from the government, right? In Norway, they expect the government to provide services that Americans wouldn't expect. And so their philanthropy gets affected. They give to different causes because there's different expectations. In your opinion, what should the government be working on versus corporations versus individual philanthropists?
Those things that, but for the government, no one else is going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And also because the government can tax into those things that are so freaking expensive that but for the taxation power, no one's going to do it. So as an example, in Atlanta, I know like other cities too, public safety is at the top of the issues for the new mayor. So when the survey is done, like that's definitely an area that government should be, right?
Yeah, I don't think I want philanthropists
right
keeping the streets safe.
Right.
Not even sure what that would That sounds bad. That sounds just like a recipe for disaster. So yeah, they're the police force, and in fact, there is some history in the U.S. of private, in particular, not just in the U.S., throughout all history, private fire departments being absolute disasters. In fact, the richest man in the history of the world was a Roman general who invented the first private fire department. And he used to, if your house was on fire, he would be like, "Great, we'll put the fire out, but then I own your house. You have to sign this document, and then you're paying rent." He became the biggest landlord in the ancient world just by putting fires out, and in some cases, setting the fires himself, right? And that's what you need, right? In fact, we had that was up until right. We had private fire departments in New York City up until the late 19th century, and they would show up to the house and make you pay them before they put the fire out. That's we can't have that, right? So I think I thoroughly agree there. Like public services that we know that everybody's going to need, right? That should be the
Infrastructure.
Yeah, we just got a big bill on infrastructure. Is there going to be opportunity for affordable housing projects like yours in that bill? I haven't read it that thoroughly.
I think, the extent that we have some partnership bill on housing, they have more funds
Yeah.
potentially. Yeah. So, so infrastructure, public safety, obviously public education will be another one. I think we'd expect, at least I would, government not looking to see all that privatized and up to philanthropists to fund.
Mm-hmm. But and it sounds like, and we were talking about this a little bit before, you like philanthropists that sort of put that, like when you're getting a PhD, for instance, push the envelope, right? Go right up to the edge of the progress that we know is possible, and then maybe try to go a little further, show a path for the government and others to follow.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, just kind of broadly speaking, do we want to design a system such that some of the most pressing problems depend upon philanthropists to solve? Would we want that? As opposed to our collective action is through government, whether that's local, state, or federal.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's like, okay, back to, but and because also philanthropy is a choice, right? So people can choose to be less or more, and it doesn't always, right, for many people, it's not even money, it's just time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, philanthropy working on kind of the inspiration, the models, pushing us all to be better, so that the collective action, comes in behind it. But I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I think you are. I think it's very interesting. The philanthropists tend to be wealthy, right? And so
the ones we read about. But if you take philanthropy, right, you know this too, that the data says a lot of people that are more modest income are more generous.
Percentage-wise, poor people are the most generous people in the U.S.
Yeah, so
they are, and there's reasons for that. And if you look at where they give, it's much different. People tend to give to things they experience personally. The wealthy give to medical research because they've either had that disease, they fear getting the disease, their father had that disease, their kid had that disease, right? Alzheimer's research. Anybody who donates primarily to Alzheimer's research, you can guarantee they're related to someone who has Alzheimer's, or they're personally worried about getting it themselves, or both. One of the things philanthropists are best at is symphonies, orchestras, museums, ballets, dance halls, because right, the people who had enough money to give gifts at that level actually went and enjoyed those things. Right? When it comes to an issue like not being able to afford a home, sort of definitionally, philanthropists won't be familiar with that. Right? So it's more foreign to them. They're not going to be as innately good at funding it as when it comes to a theater. They know exactly what they want the theater to look like, and they make beautiful ones. We have really nice museums funded by private philanthropy all over the country here, right? And in fact, Carnegie's libraries were beautiful because he himself enjoyed the concept of going to the library. He never needed the library to get a job, right? But it was a service that he could connect with and things. And so I think that's great. So when it comes to an issue like housing, it's good to have philanthropists working with you, but you're right, they might not be connected to it. That's getting the government involved, and then also getting those corporate issues, right? Then we get what we call a foundational American value of checks and balances, right? Different perspectives, different voices, different abilities, right? And hopefully end up doing some different work on an issue that, has been largely intractable. Throughout, governments, corporations, and philanthropy have all housed people over the last 100 years, but the issue remains, right?
No, man, it takes all of us, right? What would nature teach us, right? If a forest is just one kind of tree or one kind of thing, it doesn't do very well. A vibrant ecosystem requires diversity.
Yes, absolutely. I recently read a very interesting study on happiness, and it was happiness in relation to the number of different birds that you can see during a different day. People who only see one species of bird in a day are generally very depressed. It's like people who live in a lighthouse and only see seagulls, right? But if you live in a diverse ecosystem, I'm an active birder, and I've counted 37 different species of birds from the property right here, right? And I'm very happy, and I definitely see the connection. I see a lot of different variety in my life instead of just one kind of bird all the time, and it allows me to be a much more. And it's just new variety is the spice of life, as they say, and I think that applies to a lot of things. This has been a very interesting conversation. I really appreciate your work. I like the stuff that the Westside Future Fund is doing. If you've ever got a grant proposal and you want some feedback from some experts, feel free to send it along. We'd love to read it. Also, if you or anybody on your team wants to read some proposals with us, we'll be next reading in the spring. We always have proposals related to the issue of housing. Some organizations like yours like to put their grant writer on our committee to give them extra experience and perspective, or like your development interns or whatever. We would love to stay involved with the Westside Future Fund. I think it's really neat work. If there's ever anything I can do to help you, let me know. Before I let you go on with your day, trying to house the good citizens of Atlanta and revitalize Dr. King's former neighborhood. Do you have any questions for me? Anything you want to say to me or the folks at home, so, as they say?
Thanks for listening. If people are still,
I actually, from my analytics, you'd be surprised how many people make it all the way to the end of the episode.
and if obviously any of your listeners want to know more about the Westside Future Fund, we'd love to whether yes, but even if it's just like, hey, we're interested in something similar on our scene, want to learn more about it, because we learn from others. So I think we have an obligation to kind of share what we've learned and pass it on. So happy to do that, and thank you. Grateful that you took time out of your day not only to do this interview, but obviously to prepare for it.
Yes, thank you. It actually is. It does take a little bit of time, so I appreciate that, and thank you for reaching out. Normally, I have to book my own guests. You guys found out about me and reached out to me, which I really appreciate. That does make my work a little bit easier. Thanks very much.
You're becoming famous as all those birds you watch.
We were very briefly. I don't know. I don't really understand how the algorithm works, but we were like the #1 nonprofit podcast for a little while. And I ended up on like someone's like outreach list for podcast hosts, and I'm pretty sure that's how you ended up finding us. But hopefully, a lot of folks listen to this episode. I think we definitely got a lot of good stuff on the tape. If I meet a lot of people, I read a lot of interesting proposals. If ever anyone's doing cool, interesting work in Atlanta, I may put it on your attention. Feel free to be back and forth. And if I ever get down there to Atlanta. One of our evaluators just moved down there. I've been meaning to come down to visit. But big city, one of the biggest cities in America, obviously very important, and even occasionally internationally important, right? You got a big airport and all that. Lots of eyes on you. Best of luck with your work going forward. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Thank you, everybody at home, for listening to a very long episode of the Open Door Philanthropy Podcast. We've been interviewing, and it was John. I'm sorry, I'm gonna you corrected my John Ahmann.
Yep.
John Ahmann of the Westside Future Fund, who has. We're gonna let him get back to work. Thank you very much for listening, and good luck with your funding and your fundraising.